firstly, from myself, Johan Joubert, Cellar Master of Boland Cellar. It's really a privilege to do this tasting with Chenin Blanc. This is one of the varietals that's really the buzzword in South Africa. And this is the one that keeps my heart pumping. So if I'm jittering here, it's not about a presentation, it's about my love and my passion for the wine. First of all, good morning to our Chenin Blanc friends. Especially welcome to our international Chenin Blanc buyers and also the media for your continued support. And no wonder, because we compete currently and lead by example in comparison with the rest of the world. We are continuously in South Africa with a battle, and there's two things that we're battling with. First of all, is to protect our current plantings by ensuring that we reach a specific price point for a specific bottle of wine, especially when it comes to our premium and our low-yielding Chenin Blanc vineyards in South Africa. Secondly, is to motivate the producers to really plant this best South African white varietal and at the best possible sites and in the best possible soils. This was the reason for my recent shift toward Boland Vineyards International, is because I know I can live my passion and my dream there within the environment, because with good quality grapes and a good quantity of that, and by using this true nature and God-given things like soil, the two types of soil, granite and shale, definitely we're going to go the high road towards a new creation of styles. With only half an hour to put you through these wines, I've decided to illustrate the diversity of South African Chenins by focusing on the winemaking practices within a specific ward or a region, and also with the support of a micro element. And the micro element I've mainly focused on is soil and how that contributes to different South African styles. For the purpose of the tasting, I selected 7 Chenin Blanc wines of the 2013 vintage. One of them is a 2014, but I think I can be forgiven to be coming late into Boland and created that wine in the final blend. Unfortunately, other styles of Chenin Blanc, like areas from the Bot River and the Swartland region, they could not be shown because the idea today is just to take you in the world of a winemaker and how winemakers in South Africa is using their specific regionality to create their own styles. And on the tasting notes, you will see I finished this off by giving a quote of each of the winemakers and how they will describe, or how do they describe their philosophy and their thinking of the Chenin Blanc in South Africa. Each of the wines I will talk you through, and I've also put you a little list in front of you that will illustrate the yeast and the soil selection. And also the winemaking processes, like for example, whole bunch pressing, the use of the skins, and how do they create this unique wine. This then will be followed by, like I said, by a winemaker's philosophy, and to reveal the wines are as follows. The first wine is a Boland Cellar 2014 Reserve Chenin Blanc. We are also privileged to have our producer at the back there, Mr. Geldenhuys. And very interesting is if we look at this wine was 50% was inoculated by South Africa yeast. Now if you inoculate, you get a lot of fresh fruitness on Chenin Blanc. And then also 50% of the wine has undergo natural fermentation. The interesting thing, as I mentioned at the beginning, is we have these beautiful soils, the two differences. The one, the granite soil, and the second, the shale soil. You will also see that the granites normally come up very high at the mountain range, and they can go into different settlings. But the interesting thing about granite soils, you have a well-drained soil, and your roots really go quite deep. The granite soil is also always warmer in temperature, and what do you get? You get quicker ripening and a lower pH and a higher acidity. So if you keep that in mind, running through the tasting and taste each of the single South African examples, the differences between granite and shale. On the other hand, you will see that the shale soils go into layers of slight settlings as it goes through the years of settling in South Africa. And as it compacted, obviously the grapes that are grown on there, the soil are quite colder soil. You do have that the soil are not so well drained to keep the moisture. You have a very slow and a long ripening period, and normally your pHs are slightly a bit higher and your acidity levels are lower. And then I'm just gonna, on this paper that I put up here, this is a combination of a duplex soil which got sand loam on the top and a clay layer. It's not the example that I have with the wines that I made, but also in the last wine, this type of soil will be illustrated. Now if you look at the Boland Focus, the grapes was crushed, kept on the skins, and if you keep it on the skins, you have an increase of polyphenols. And the amount of polyphenols, is most of the flavors for me are in the skins of the grapes. And that's why I'm a lover of skin contact. And the focus, if we look at the winemaker's philosophy currently at Boland, our focus are to ensure the maximum fruit expression with plantings on granite and shale soil and blend that back towards a consumer style. So you can please taste this wine. Immediately you pick up, there's a lot of freshness in the front, good expression of guava, citrusy, and a bit of limey fruit. Well balanced with the shale soil, give it a bit of creamy texture, and a good interaction. This one just won also at the IWSC Gold Award, so we're very proud of it. The second wine, without a doubt, a total style difference from our South African winemaker, Brewer Raads. And if you look at the Brewer Raads wines, you will see the opposite. 100% natural fermented. You will find that if you look at the soils, as he as a passionate winemaker describing it, they have table sandstone on the top, and if you look at the bottom, you will find decomposed granite. He do wine whole bunch pressing, and he go directly into the barrel. It's a very interesting concept, and you hear a lot about international winemakers, African winemakers, that when they use settling use, they don't want to clear with the juice. Also, they take a bit of the polyphenols with to the final fermentation process, and immediately that contributes to a bigger mouthfeel and a bigger complexity. What he do in terms of the barrels, he rolled the barrels every week for about 11 months, and that's quite hard work. He believes that you don't want to open the barrel. Once you open the barrel and you got oxygen inside the barrel, you get a different polymerization, and you want to keep it quite tight, and that way his philosophy are the follows: let the terroir and the soil lead the way for you as a winemaker to follow your style of winemaking. And you can feel it in the complexity and the mouthfeel of this wine, how interesting he creates on the palate. He described his wine to be a Chenin Blanc with white fruit like pear, a bit of quince, and focus specifically on that, finishing off to the end of the wine. So that's a natural fermented 100% wine. Very interesting style change there. Now the third producer is Teddy Hall from Teddy Hall Wines. It's also in Stellenbosch. And this wine is the Dr. Katz Chenin Blanc 2013. It's a 100% natural fermented wine as well. But what's happening here is with the Raats wine, you have the sand on the top and the shale on the bottom. With Teddy's wine, you have 100% shale soils. And interesting, as I mentioned for you in the beginning, that if you have this grapes that ripening on the shale soils with the longer hanging time, you find much more layers, richness, complexity, not so upfront fruit freshness, but beautiful extension of fullness. He also believes to be low sulfur approach. Just in the beginning a bit, he put the bung on very tight, and at the end of the day, he say no stir of the lees. Just keep the wine in the barrel as it is, go as natural as possible. Then he sulfur just before bottling, and his philosophy are learn through experience. So he's been experienced a lot of Chenin Blanc winemaking already, that a natural fermentation and no interference creates a bigger complexity. It's interesting how you hear the winemaker's philosophies. And you are asking us, we sit with this beautiful country, we sit with sunlight, the guys are opening up the bunches very early. Sometimes they don't sucker the leaves. Yeah, you have a new dimension. Guys are now playing around to ferment it on skins. I personally believe find the right balance right in the beginning. Right, the fourth wine is a winery also very well known for Chenin Blanc in South Africa. It's the De Morganson Chenin Blanc. Unfortunately, they're not on the stands here today, but as I talk to Carl about it, you will see he started very interesting. He started his natural fermentation, and then he inoculated the wine with a Saccharomyces yeast strain. And we have the people from Tallis here as well. And if we talk about new styles in South Africa, the non-Saccharomyces yeast to use in the beginning, that's a new theory that people are playing around with. But if you look at Carl's philosophy, and you said, if you follow always the correct procedures to ensure a finished fermentation and a style-driven wine. All of this wine so far is coming from a combination of either bush wine or bush wine and trellised. And having said that it's quite important that with a 40-year-old bush wine, and you look at the bunches that are ripening, the crop are going from 2 to 4, 5 tons per hectare. There's a lot of concentration in the use of that Chenin Blancs. And the bunches get up to 60, 80 grams in size, which really are using a lot of concentration. So working with that product, it's quite important for the Morganson, for example, is to make sure that you do have a dry fermentation at the end. So while he's putting his little babies ongoing in terms of fermentation in the cellar, he takes small parts of each from the barrel, he put it in a different barrel, he used this Saccharomyces yeast strain, he fermenting it in 2 or 3 bottling, then he put it back to the barrel, and he makes sure that it runs totally dry, because it's quite cost effectively. You can see later on there's a lot of awards on these bottles. International awards are leading by example. I will just touch on 2 or 3 of them, but you will find later on the picture. It's really good examples of what's going on. If you look at the Morganson wine as well, back to the soils, 100% granite. And if you run through the 4 wines, the 4th wine you will immediately pick up beautiful freshness again, the granites immediately increasing to a bit of a higher acidity, good freshness to it, and a bit of a different touch of Chenin Blanc. And I think that's where we can counter the world. is when we have really this superb pockets in South Africa, identify them and use this freshness. Also in terms of the final style. Right, then we go to the last three wines. First of all, this is my wine from the Cape Winemakers Guild. It's only 1 barrel or 2 barrels I normally do from this wine. So it's a really limited quantity. And you will see in my philosophy, I'm a granite freak. I do like granites to bring the most and the highest expression of South African Chenins. I personally like it to give an identity of soil and really bring freshness to this varietal. I do like white upfront tannins by not so much interference, and if you find really those pockets and use the Burgundy barrels to that, you even increase the amount of freshness on the Chenin Blancs, and that will at the end carry through in terms of your final wine. Still a young wine, part of it's been auctioned, but the other part I keep for myself, and I will cite later on about it. But if you look at the wine, there is some settling. It's the first Chenin, or the second Chenin Blanc that go through a settling process. The natural fermented winemakers, they go directly into the barrel and they let the process start, where when it's been inoculated, first the settling is. So, but you take clear juice to the barrel, but you do have right in the beginning, you do have the extraction of polyphenols from the skins of the grapes, where the most flavor is. And that is a point of difference of a style of Chenin. Keep this wine in mind when you taste this wine against the next wine, because the next wine is a wine that I made at a previous winery that I were at Kleine Zalse, where we use a combination of the same granite vineyard, that is on the same soils, 50%, and then go back towards the bottom parts near the Sea of Makassar, and where the Fora farm is, we have layers of this type of shale soils, where you do have the old wine. I didn't bring the board with me today, but I was actually walking down to the vineyards, and obviously at that stage of buying in some grapes, and the digger loader was pulling out these old bush wines that should be still today, mostly of that in the soil, because if you look at the farmer and the producer, they must be earn a specific money and price to keep this viable and productive. Luckily I stopped it and save about 5 tons to 7 tons of these grapes, and today still they are using it in the final blend. You will see both of them are being inoculated with 50% South Africa yeast strain, which got freshness and fruit, and then this other 50% is a French yeast strain, which always are fermented quite longer and give quite richer and fuller and lengthiness to the palate. If we look at the philosophy of the Kleine Zalse, I think I will describe it as follows. That will be used both the shale and the granite soils to create the balance in mouthfeel. Now this specific wine then ends up to win the Munisvini, the best international, the Concours du Mundo, best international Chenin Blanc, or best international white wine at the show. And this just shows you, if we are focusing on our Chenins, and we made it to a specific style, we live our dream and our passion with the grapes, they definitely pull through to the final result. Then you can take on and bring an identifying style with it. Right, the last wine is Ken Forrester, the FMC CapeWine2013. And those of you that know the style will already know if there's a Chenin Blanc flight, this is also wine that definitely must be in there, because it's got definitely its own identity. If I talk to Ken about it, you will find that he specifically go through a very clean approach with his grapes. He makes sure no pesticides. He specifically have the sand lime type of soil with a very shallow clay. He using the GIS system as well, and he specifically identify some of the pockets that are growing much more vigorous. So he will go into perhaps a second harvesting, but they're also handling that separately and bring that separately to the different SKU of wine for them. Talking this morning to Ken Forrester, he said the vineyard is his heart of the wine, and it finds his duty to maintain the vibrant liveliness of the fruit. And I think if you taste through these different Chenin Blancs, you will find there's one little theme that's permanently carrying through all these wines. It's a big winemaker's knowledge about his grapes, his soils, how did each of his bunches ripening, work his way towards his cellar, don't want to interfere too much with very aromatic yeast strains, but build the identity around a South African style of Chenin Blanc. To wrap this up, I will say, because I only have half an hour, I will say, running through these wines, we can easily add another flight of another 5 or 7 interesting South African Chenins. But living with these styles of winemaking in South Africa, you will see that the guys are really doing their best. I want you also to support South African Chenins, to understand if there's a price per bottle to be paid. And going to a low production of about 28 to 30 hectoliters per ton, this is really a serious business. And living it through the heart, definitely very good examples of South African Chenins. But please go through the stands and from here have a different view on the seriousness and the quality levels of South African Chenins. Thank you very much.